Hello and welcome to Firstpost. The ceasefire between India and Pakistan is holding, but the battle has now shifted away from the skies and the land over to narratives. Over in Pakistan, there are celebrations in cities with their government claiming they have won this exchange with India. But what do satellite images and on-ground evidence suggest? That's what we're discussing right now. And joining me is an expert on modern warfare, Mr. John Spencer. Thank you, sir, for speaking to Firstpost. Now, like I mentioned, you've seen a lot of the evidence, the satellite pictures presented by the Indian side because the Pakistanis have not presented any evidence. Based on that, would you say this has been a decisive aerial victory for the Indian military?
The overall reason is that, I teach war, I teach strategy. Determining what is a decisive victory is often hard in war. But the decisive victory is the achievement of India's goals after being attacked. So strategic goals. All that you just listed were definitely a contributing factor. The fact that India achieved multiple strategic goals in a matter of 4 days, that's a decisive victory. But the clearest definition is just what did they achieve? What were their goals? And my assessment is their goal was, of course, to immediately respond to the terrorist attack, established a new red line that there will be immediate, clear, decisive, overwhelming responses to any attacks emanating from Pakistan, from a terrorist or a military. And then when after it hit the nine terrorist attacks at will, very discriminately, the Pakistan military attacked, which was an escalation. Then India controlled, but with extreme military superiority, showed the ability to hit Pakistani military sites, many of them, without any restriction, without any interference in their ability, sending a clear message of military superiority of India can hit any site in Pakistan whenever it wants, which was, of course, there's a demonstration of both India's offensive capability, but when Pakistan attacked, India demonstrated its defensive capability, its integrated air suite of capabilities, both ground and air, that Pakistan wasn't able to hit a single target when they tried. That military superiority objective is critical for the other objective, which is establishing deterrence, right? So you want to deter Pakistan from continuing to attack, and by demonstrating that military superiority, immediately establish not only deterrence, but also force in this case, the other side, you don't want to say enemy, but clearly the attacker, forced him to change his behavior and ask for a ceasefire. So that's an immediate demonstration. And then lastly, so decisive also because war is political, right? They're political goals. Of course, this military demonstrated immense military superiority, but war is the pursuit of political goals. So India's government, Prime Minister Modi's statements, established a new doctrine, which is one that any terrorist attack will be responded to, that nuclear blackmail will no longer be acceptable and is reckless, in that they will respond below the nuclear threshold. And this was important in this 4 day operation, was that it was very limited in clear goals shown to the world, both verbally and through the satellite imagery like you talked about. But India established a new doctrine here that they will act independently, decisively, and without external help. So that's the last one, right? India showed that they have strategic independence. They will respond to self-defend themselves without external requirements or negotiations or political ramifications. And all of that equals a very unique, decisive military campaign that rapidly achieved strategic goals.
You spoke about that new doctrine being set by India. What we are hearing from the government is that the next terror attack or any terror attack in the future will be seen as an act of war by the Indian government and the response will be appropriate. Now, will this attack and the Operation Sindoor that we launched last week, will that be enough to deter Pakistan from launching further attacks? And has India reached a level where we are confident about escalating this to a conventional war without the fear of it reaching a nuclear paradigm?
So it's a great question. I try not to do forecasting because there's so much at play here, and this is when you understand war and you understand even national security or foreign diplomacy. The enemy always gets a vote, so I can't get into the minds. Although we try to play rational actor theory on what the Pakistan government and military, clearly showing that didn't want any more military operations because they were basically being defeated so easily. I'm hopeful that it establishes deterrence. India is very clear on their now doctrine. Um, I think it's different than the past, right? If we look at 2019 response to the Balakot, if we look at 2008, which I've walked the ground in Mumbai, the awful attack to the 2008 Mumbai attacks, and the 166 Indian or people died, and the response was more that diplomatic negotiations. And although India is about to go to the UN National Security Council with clear evidence of this terrorist attack, I can't tell you what the terrorists are going to do because sometimes they're irrational actors, but the message is definitely clear. Like, we don't want war, but we're prepared to defend ourselves very decisively. And that's different than even we go back to 2001, the attack. This is a different India for sure.
Let's talk about the turning point last week as well. What led to Pakistan reaching out to India and saying, we've had enough, let's try a ceasefire now? Was it the deep strikes on Pakistani air bases carried out by the Indian Air Force? Was it that alleged strike on nuclear command centers? What was that turning point that forced Pakistan to say, we've had enough?
I'm not sure. Again, I do open source research, so I same as you and everybody in India, can make assumptions on what it could possibly be. Absolutely, of course, everybody, United States and everybody around the world, didn't want to see further escalation. And Pakistan stopping to attack as India is showing clear capability to hit very discriminately any site. So I think it was a combination of factors, but this is why when people try to get me to believe, forecast, and people think that decisions are black and white. Even for India, decisions aren't, they're very clear decisions, but even when you get into this national level and why you want strong, powerful leaders, you want this type of leadership, but you also want them to consider all the geopolitical, economic, diplomatic, what we call spillover, right? So, Pakistan is backed by the Chinese industry at least, but the connections are very complex. So I can't tell you what the exact, but I'm sure that at the top was everybody's concern of escalation that would cause people to kind of choose a side. We should all be on the side against terrorism. And unfortunately, Pakistan is not on the side against terrorism. It's in the side of supporting it. Some of that, can't continue. So we don't know. This is why a strategy is always adaptive. And this is even why at the start of Operation Sindoor, nobody could tell you what the Pakistanis were going to do. And Israel and India had to be very clear on what it was going to respond with. So strategy is very adaptive. I can't tell you what that I'm sure nobody wants, to include in India, nobody wants to be attacked and nobody wants the war to escalate.
Now, one reason this conflict was so widely followed was because it was supposed to be the big debut of Chinese weapons in combat. Chinese jets, Chinese missiles, air defense system, all of them were seeing combat for the first time. From the looks of it, India managed to punch through those Chinese arms and weapons. But what did you make of it? Do you think the Chinese weapons held up?
Clearly it showed lacking in capability, and India showed the which is not simple, right? I don't want to make things very simple, although people want explanations of the sheer amount of technologies, radar jamming, radar missiles, out of line of sight missiles, the risk to the pilots to be able to penetrate Pakistani airspace and to hit these targets and hit the air defense systems themselves. I understand a lot of what the technical requirements are to do that. This was a test of those Chinese systems, and they showed up wanting in spades, right? India hit every target it wanted to, and you can't hide that through satellite imagery, like you say. Now you have all this misinformation. So Pakistan taking, from a Chinese or Soviet, basically playbook, putting out information with no credible evidence, hoping that it just sticks. And some in the international media took it, right? So CNN, Reuters, everybody started reporting 5, 6 Indian jets shot down, and nobody's seen a wreckage. That's so from me, clear evidence, reports of Indian losses, but clearly there is no parity here. There's no we achieved some level of success. Like, it's an overwhelming tactical defeat when you can't stop things in your country from blowing up, and you failed to destroy anything in India on your attacks. There's some technicalities on what system, like early flight kind of intercept awareness, right? The aerial platforms that can detect jets and things like that. There's some technical things that did work for Pakistan, and this was a test of both the Pakistan military investments in that Chinese backed system, some Turkish systems, but also a test of India's investments in its self-made systems, and some Israeli, some other Russian system with the S-400. But I also don't want people understanding that this was a test. A lot was learned on both sides. So changes will continue to have to be made to keep that military superiority, while the other side recognizes that they invested in some wrong things, but they're going to make adjustments.
Let's talk a bit about the role of President Trump. His announcement, his ceasefire announcement, literally came out of nowhere last week. Is this a case of the president just going for a low-hanging diplomatic fruit since his other peace efforts are not working out? Or do you think there's more to this open siding almost with Pakistan?
So I try not to do politics. I do war, which is politics by other means. I'm sure that the president of the United States and the Secretary of State and others were in communication with India and with Pakistan, trying to, like, look, we don't want this to escalate. I believe India's statement that they say Pakistan called based on the things that were exploding in Pakistan, and said that they were willing and wanted a stop in the operations, and whether you call that a ceasefire or not. I don't think the strategic fallout, although I've seen the media kind of try to pose this rift. Of course, President Trump is bold. He says bold things, and it's not just about India. So you have to take that within the comprehension. The relationship between the United States and India is very strong, and I think it should continue to be, both militarily, economically, even defense agreements that are being talked about. All that's very important. I think this is more of a media story than it is an actual story, and that the relationship's very strong, as both nations are two of the strongest nations in the world.
You wrote a relatively long piece on what happened last week and the clashes between India and Pakistan. And in that, you talked about the forever wars that are going on right now, whether it's Ukraine or Gaza. These are protracted conflicts that have been going on for multiple years, and they've caused a lot of civilian casualties. India, on the other hand, went for a non-escalatory limited operation. Do you think that's a new method that other countries we will see explore in the future? Limited use of military power to achieve political gains instead of the winding, long-drawn operations that we've seen in the last 2 decades?
Well, yes, this is a great case study. I do case studies, so I go into wars, I recreate battles and wars, so we learn the right lessons and then make sure that we're not paraphrasing basically what happened. The context always matters. I do believe this is a very strong case of showing that, there are unlimited wars where the goal is like regime change. Like we see in even Gaza right now, the goal is to remove a power from both political and military capabilities. But there are also unlimited basically objectives like that. Then there are limited objectives, like having somebody that stop attacking you, to reestablish deterrence. Those are also case studies where sometimes, because of many international pressure, international considerations, that even in a limited war, the means to achieve the goal of reestablishing deterrence or stopping somebody from attacking you isn't implemented with the leadership and certainty that India showed here. Even the nuclear blackmail card, right? Which you never want to be reckless when there are nuclear weapons involved, but nuclear weapons is a tool for a nation's survival. It shouldn't be something it uses and what we call saber rattles for any action it takes, right? And we've seen that even in the last 5 years in certain places, like with Russia's operations. Like, nobody wants to say, like, what you're doing is wrong. And yes, you have nuclear weapons, and that's very important. But there is also consequences and limited goals that can be achieved very quickly. And this is what India will forever have this case study of. This is what right looks like. Clear political goals, non-escalatory, but very responsive with a clear message to the entire world. This is what I'm doing. This is why. But we will defend our territory. Nobody's trying to overthrow the other government. All of these things that are really important. But that distinction between unlimited and limited wars is very important to me as kind of a war researcher. So people don't take it out of context.
Right. And just a final word on what we can expect Pakistan to do next. Like you mentioned, a lot of their Chinese weapons were found wanting in this conflict. So do you see them going back to the Americans to buy more of Western weapons, or do you see them doubling down on Chinese weapons, irrespective of whether they've proven their mettle in this battle or not?
So one, you would hope that the behavior would change greatly, right? So the support to terrorism and then investment in terrorism. The number is ridiculous. Like 20 different terror groups within Pakistan that are backed by, in some way, by the government, if not directly by the ISI. So, that investments in defense technologies, this is where it's really interesting to see if they double down on the Chinese-backed systems, requests from Russia, from the Islamic regime in Iran. There are lots of basically providers of technology, but this is why I study wars, that there are many lessons here in many wars on what works, what don't, that there is no magic pill. You have to have an integrated system of both legacy and advanced systems. India also will continue to learn, continue to invest and adapt so that we don't have wars. Pakistan, I think we will see on who it decides to. I mean, I hope that it changes its behaviors, but there are many issues that they have right now, to include water and other issues, that because of their strategy of supporting terrorism, it has consequences. So I'm hoping there's a change. I'm not sure where. My gut tells me they'll double down on the Chinese defenses and just try to layer in some other capabilities, but we'll see.
Right about the state that Pakistan is in, they've got many problems to deal with. The question is, what next steps do they do? Do they continue to sponsor terrorism against India, or they choose to focus on their own internal problems, including security issues in Balochistan? Thank you so much, Mr. John Spencer, for speaking to Firstpost.
Thank you.